Welcome to Security Architecture Podcast, where we help cybersecurity professionals to stay ahead of the curve and ensure they are successful in their cybersecurity journey.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending where are you. Welcome to Security Architecture Podcast Live event. We have three amazing guests who participate in Season 1 and Season 2 of our show. You can find more information in the link below about the seasons and about the topics. It's now time to introduce our guests. Mike. Mike is a Senior Vice President of Product Management in BitGlass. He has been leading BitGlass product division for the last 7 years. Mike, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Shurek. Thank you for the introduction. And I lead the product team at BitGlass. Essentially, the product team is composed of product management and technical marketing and whatnot, as well as design. And I've been at the company for 7 years as you mentioned.
Thank you. Paul. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of iBoss. He also is the chief architect for the company and leading the product strategy as well. Paul, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. It's good to be here. I'm the CEO and CTO of iBoss. Lead all of product vision and technology for the company as well. It's great to join you guys.
Thank you. Nathan is leading the transformation strategy in Zscaler. Nathan leverages his background as an architect and pen tester to help companies in their security transformation. Nathan, can you please add more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Real pleasure to be here with this good group of people. So at Zscaler, I run a number of things, but the primary thing is transformation, which is helping customers understand how they need to get from point A to point B, and what that really means to them from multi-levels of technology, but also the direction and the final outcomes they want to achieve. That means all things technical, all things architectural, all things design. So good to be here.
Excellent. So let's start with our panel discussion. And the first topic we want to discuss is, of course, related to SaaSi. And let's kick off this question with Mike. Mike, in your opinion, does SaaSi fulfill temporary work for home pandemic-related needs, or it's here to stay with us?
I think SaaSi is here to stay. I don't think it's a fad from a perspective of the introduction of the concept in August of 2019. It was a lot of things were coming together, right? A lot of things product-wise, technology-wise, from a technology perspective, were being combined. And that's only accelerated with the pandemic. I think even though it will go away, there will still be this work from home change that happens globally. And what we're seeing there, if you look at the announcement in this last week with Google and people staying from home all the way until September now, I think there'll be changes with the way people do work. And so you're going to want a solution from a SaaSi perspective that can protect people wherever they're at, right? It doesn't matter what device they're necessarily accessing the corporate assets from, or if they're working from home or working from an office. You want the same type of protection, and really SaaSi's here to bring that solution. And I think it's here to stay.
Amazing. Paul, Nathan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. Mike is right. We're not going to be seeing a shift back. If you look at what SaaSi calls out, it's a uniformity of connectivity, right? And security in play. So if you break it down to what it really is, so that means the same thing should be working for anyone, well, regardless if they're working from home or they're working from an airport one day or a coffee shop one day again, or even in the office. It should be that uniformity is key. So I think it's actually, for the first time, the real unification of a number of different ways of working in the industry to simplify connectivity and security in one way, which, as Mike rightfully said, will stay the way it will happen for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think the way people connect is completely transformed. And it's not, I don't think that this actually has anything necessarily to do with just COVID or shutdowns, although that's accelerated what's going on. This transformation of the way people connect to the things they need in the cloud was already going to occur. You look at Office 365, Zoom, modern cloud applications, they all require a significant amount of bandwidth and connectivity. And actually, if you think about gear appliances, things like Proxy appliances, gateways that are mired in gear, they have throughput limitations and they require a lot of infrastructure. And realistically, as you think about the way IT and security professionals have scoped out these types of infrastructure projects, they typically provision them in terms of how much connectivity and how much bandwidth a building or an organization is going to need. But the reality is users need as much bandwidth as they can possibly consume. And you can see this coming with 5G and with virtually everything else that they're going to be consuming directly from the cloud. And so, as IT professionals, security professionals, which are directly in conflict, with connectivity, you want speed. With security, you want to inspect virtually every transaction for compliance, malware, data loss, which can slow things down. But if we're really setting our mindset in terms of worrying about bandwidth going up or encrypted connections going up, you're really betting against users. I mean, you're basically saying you want the equivalent of dial-up connections on Zoom. So I think you need to solve cloud problems with cloud solutions, and actually the only way to do that is to transform the way people connect. And I think that's what SaaSi really is all about, is the transformation of the equivalent of Blockbuster to Netflix. The way people connect is going to be completely different. It's going to continue to go in this direction, making IT teams and security teams a lot more agile.
Thank you. Paul, you mentioned an interesting point that the way people connect will be completely different. From what I see right now, a lot of companies and people as well trying to connect with their own devices, not always corporate devices, or maybe not always enough devices or no time to ship you the device. From certain studies, there's around 72% of companies that's struggling with BYOD and what to do with BYOD. What's your take on how to secure such devices?
Yeah, I think this whole notion of zero trust and SaaSi, which go hand in hand, the where a user is located is completely irrelevant. Actually, I think, today we're thinking in terms of working from home, and in this case, even more so with your own device. But I think we need to take a step back and say, what is the difference between a user who's working in a conference room in an office that happens to be connected to the neighbor's Wi-Fi? If you look at every device that exists today, whether it's corporate owned or your own personal device, there's no Ethernet ports. These are all Wi-Fi devices. And so the point is, you can't control what IP transport or where a user connects through or from. It's completely untrusted and should be considered that way. And so realistically, I think we first start with the notion that locations are relevant inside or outside the office. Now, the device type itself, there's going to be controls, like different types of controls you might put in a device, whether it's, endpoint or patching, patch management, anything else you might want to do. I do believe that connectivity is key because it's the glue that even allows any sort of cloud transformation from occurring. But as you start looking at devices and bring your own devices, you do want to allow users to connect to the resources that they need in a secure way. And I think things like SaaSi allow for microsegmentation. They provide the bridge, the proxy, to allow any device type to connect to those resources because it's not relying on those devices connecting through your physical network. And BYD to me is just the extreme case of that scenario, where it's your own device and it's not your network, but you still own that connection and the transaction.
Do I need to install an agent? Do I need to use some other means to secure such device?
I'll let others speak to this as well, but my position is, if you look at the Gartner report that actually defined the SaaSi market, it's was titled "The Future of Network Securities in the Cloud." It says leading SaaSi vendors will require an agent. I believe that's true for corporate-owned devices, and I think that the reason I believe that is that if you can't control where a user connects from, you can't force the network traffic through your stuff, your gear, your firewalls, your proxies. But you still need the ability through SaaSi as a SaaS service to grab things like SSH, RDP, things that live outside the web browser, so that every single transaction, every single packet that leaves that device goes through the SaaSi edge, through the SaaSi service. And the only way to accomplish that is with an agent or some sort of client that can capture that. But when you go to BYOD, whether users end up installing an agent or not, I think there should be choices for that. Agentless, maybe for browser-based, and if they want to get access to something like a SQL database or something like that, maybe an agent that's intelligent, as well as meeting the requirements, privacy requirements and other things like that. GDPR constraints and restraints going on in California are really driving some of these decisions as well. They're not just technology decisions. But I do think for corporate-owned devices, for sure, if you want to have every transaction, you're going to need an agent. For personal devices, that'll be questionable.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. So I think that's accurate from what Paul's describing here. The key things being that as you said a minute ago, actually, also Paul, that things have been amplifying of people is something that's been happening for at least 5 more years, right? And so what's really key there is you're able to see the traffic and you're able to inspect it. So you can combine things that you might get from CAPI, which is a piece of SASE associated with things like API connections. But the problem with that is that's only near real time, right? Someone edits a document and shares it out, and then after the fact, an action's taken, which is where proxies come in. And so some key things with respect to being able to control the traffic are different types of proxies. So we were talking about, agents and whatnot. That typically is a forward proxy use case where I have some software configuration on the device that sends my traffic through this enforcement point, right? This enforcement point in the cloud being the SASE architecture. But for devices that are off the network, that are maybe non-corporate devices and RBYO, you need something that can get in the path there. And that's where some of the reverse proxy infrastructure comes in, which is one of the things that BitGlass was founded upon. And the technology-wise, if you stick with the reverse proxy component, the idea behind that is you're not actually tying into any configuration or agent installation, because a lot of times people don't want to do that, right? It's similar to an analogy with respect to MDM, where you don't necessarily want to install it on your personal device, but if someone buys you one and gives you a corporate device, then for sure you're going to use that, right? This is a method to say, you get a phone call from your boss and they ask you to look at something, and you can go to a hotel kiosk, or you can go to your spouse's PC or your friend's PC and be able to log in, but still have a protection mechanism. And so with BYO, what you're typically looking at is blocking the risks that are associated with threats. You don't know if that machine is compromised or not for data being uploaded. And on the download side, you're looking at things like aspects of data exfiltration, right? So protecting the data in some way before it comes down to the end user, allowing some sort of permitted access so they can do some of their work, but they can't exfiltrate any of that data. And I think that some of the keys there are being able to identify the differences between the two and set up the policies accordingly, so you have protection regardless of how the application is accessed on whatever device.
Yeah, and if I chime in on top of that, I think you guys have both nailed it from either side of the equation, which is there is definitely the need to think about what is the actual use case for the end user. So are they coming from what device, and really what are they trying to consume? Like, that's the question that needs to be answered. And then there's the other side, is what is the security model that the company wants to protect that solution around? Is it simply going to be an internet-based service that gets some sort of internet flow? Or is it going to be something that is, as Mike just said, about behind a reverse proxy, or something that requires that kind of layer of protection and control? Now, that scenario then needs to play out in each company's risk model, because there may be a need to install a client on a personal device if they need access to an application that can't be reverse proxied or can't be stuck in an appropriate place. So there needs to be consideration of that. Also, it might be worthwhile to have a client on the device of BYOD if you want to do some validation of tests. So like, say, test the posture of a device to make sure that it meets a certain requirement to get the access. And that may not be possible based upon those reverse proxy solutions or our internet-based services. So that model needs to be decided basically on, I guess, that decision of what is the user source, understanding those users, and what is that application, and then finding that balance point from a security and control point of view that each company has. It's not black and white. It's certainly not something that one company will do the same as another. But that's my little 2 cents on that one as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with respect to, and although you didn't say it specifically, that this zero trust model, right? You're looking at the device, you're checking the posture, you're trying to determine what's going on there, and different than NAC, right? Where you get permission and you get access. You want to be monitoring it continuously, right? So you want the agent to look and say, hey, although this is a corporate device and I might be doing protections on it, what happens when it may become compromised and it transitions from this trusted device to now an untrusted one, and you would apply a different policy at that point. So looking for things like command and control, for example, things like this Sunburst, SolarWinds type stuff with the C2 domains, looking for things that disable applications or drivers or services that are running is really critical as well, so that you can do that transition.
Fully agree.
Dimitri, you on mute?
Thank you. So the next question is to Nathan to kick off. And what would be the preparations you recommend your customers to do before planning the move to SaaS, right? I mean, everyone wants to transition to the cloud and cloud security, and everyone talking about this today. But what do you really need to do first on their side to exercise and understand what kind of issues they need to address, or if there is any ROI component, etc.
Sure. I think there's a couple of ways of running at this. And I'll start off with kind of a loose way and then more of a specific way. And I think the loose way is just get something in place and start seeing what you get. I think one of the biggest pieces of a SaaS solution it gives you is visibility. And you can't make the decisive outcome or decisive decisions without having that visibility. So maybe just getting up and running and in good old-fashioned firewall naming and terminology, just put any allow in place and see what you see. That's kind of that cloud discovery, so to speak, that or the discovery process that the Gartner standard calls out. But I think there's actually a better way of doing it than that kind of let's just throw the ball and see what happens. And that's understanding a bit about, and I kind of mentioned it a minute ago, which is the idea of users and applications and understanding what is that tie-in between the user set and then the applications. When I say the user set, most enterprises probably already have a fairly well-described directory of what the roles and responsibilities are. And we can talk about this in perhaps another podcast of that I personally believe that the roles and responsibilities of an organization don't sit with IT, they sit with HR. And they should be mapped into an IT solution through the appropriate controls. So when a person moves from job A in the network team into finance, their network access and control doesn't follow them into their finance role. So I think that idea of defining the roles appropriately and it doesn't have to be granular at the moment. You just need to have an idea of what is available and what you can utilize. Gives you the ability to start deciding what are the controls you want to put in place. So again, do I need to do DLP exfiltration on HR, whereas the security team, we trust them, as an example. And that's one part. The other part is in the application spaces and understanding perhaps what those applications are in terms of your risk. Are they solutions that should be going through a CASB solution so that you can then start assigning those roles and responsibilities to CASB? Or should you be are they just basically internet sites or something that's not going to be consumed through a web service? Maybe it's an SQL service or something else. How do you then apply those controls to the right locations? So understanding at some high level those two sides of the equation will give most enterprises a good place to start when it becomes that kind of time to go, okay, I'm turning this on, and how do I get the appropriate value out of this right away, rather than going through that kind of discovery phase, which also helps, don't get me wrong. Visibility is very key, but having that initial foundational work really helps to get started.
Yeah, my perspective here. So the way I think about SASE is this is not the creation of a space. It's the transformation of a space. So when I think about, when you think about a secure access service edge or SASE, the idea is that the space itself, IT, networking, and security are still very required. And they're very, very critical job functions. SASE makes those job functions a lot more agile, more responsive, more efficient, because you're eliminating the gear and the appliances that are required to put into a data center, rack and stack. If you've done racking and stacking enough, the only thing you're getting out of it is exercise at this point. So what I like to think of, especially when you're going through a SASE transformation, is I would go through what you're doing today traditionally with gear, policies, whether they're proxy policies for DLP, malware, compliance. They have to be, proxies in particular are very good at, and especially the enterprise class deployments, they're good at understanding a user's role, which ties very nicely with zero trust. So that as a user connects through a service or through a system, you can dynamically map and provide them access based off who they are. And I think that as I think about a SASE transformation is I would go and look at what you're traditionally doing in a very, maybe much slower way with appliances and gear, and ensure that a service can map those same features and functions over to the SASE equivalent, which basically extends the service edge, the security to not just those users that were stuck in an office, but also users wherever they go. It shouldn't be your problem as an IT administrator or security admin where the user sits, and then ensure that it has all the not only the policy sets but all of the security things that you do as well. So I do think that as we think about SASE and SaaS transformation, a lot of people may assume that jobs are potentially at risk, or networks going away or security is going away. The title of the SASE paper, where the term is actually defined, is called "The Future of Network Security is in the Cloud." Not that the future of network security doesn't exist. And so I feel a little bit more strongly that you can go and taste and kind of put stuff in for the guest users, but all of your users are remote right now. They're working remotely. So if you're using VPNs and appliances, there's nothing worse than that, because you got to think of productivity. I mean, the productivity is horrific. The number of calls you have to the help desk are probably through the roof. People complaining that their connections are too slow and they can't access the things they need. It's likely because the VPN saturated or the appliance is saturated. I've also even heard some vendors describe that they're going to send appliances home with their employees. I think that's ludicrous. I mean, you can't, like, the office environment, the perimeter network perimeter is going away. So why don't we just ship network gear to home with users so that they can plug it in? And now the IT staff is also responsible for everybody's home network too, especially when the kids are gaming or learning and the network goes down. You're going to call the IT department for the company. It's going to be a nightmare beyond just privacy concerns. So I think that SaaSi, for me, is the transformation of what you're doing traditionally with gear, but as a SaaS service in a much more scalable and agile way. Just like when the DVD player went away and you went to Netflix, it's still high definition movies. You can just watch them from anywhere and in your hotel room. I mean, it just makes it a lot more enjoyable, faster, cheaper. Everything about it is just better.
Yeah, I think when I talk to prospects and customers that are trying to adopt more SaaSi type capabilities, the recommendation that I would have is don't just look at dots on an analyst report. You can't just take people's word for granted. I would talk to people, and if you do have a Gartner, Forrester subscription or whatnot, call them and ask them some questions. Try to figure out, try to understand a little bit better. But better yet, talk to reference customers, talk to people who have been using the solutions before, figure out what the trade-offs are, where there's been missteps and whatnot, so that you don't run into the same problems or you don't purchase the wrong thing and end up being hurt by that for a long period of time, depending on what term you purchase. But what's absolutely required is an actual analysis and an evaluation. Right now, there's unfortunately, people kind of took liberty to use SaaSi all over the place. I think there's probably 40 or 50 different vendors trying to use SaaSi in marketing material right now, at least. And there's a lot of FUD out there. And so the problem, though, also is that things are evolving rapidly. So even if you did talk to someone and maybe your budget got cut or whatnot, and it was 6 months ago or even 3 months ago, things could have changed. The market's reacting and evolving so rapidly that you always want to relook at what's going on and do an actual evaluation. I've seen unfortunate situations where people have just bought based on a word of mouth recommendation or a dot placement on a quadrant, and that's hurt them really bad for their organization, sometimes costing them their jobs. So make sure you take a look, make sure you do due diligence, and figure out what's right for you. That's really critical, I think, in the buying process.
Mike, let's go a bit more tactical. As part of the SaaSi bucket, there's multiple things there. There's the ZTNA part, the Zero Trust, the Secure Web Gateway, the Firewall as a Service, CASB, and DLP. Where do I start as a company?
Yeah, a good question. So from a perspective of the kinds of things that we've been seeing at Bitglass, probably, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, definitely 18 months ago, there was a shift from people actually coming in and saying, hey, I want a CASB, tell me what your CASB can do, or hey, I want some secure gateway component or some ZTNA specific thing. What's coming in now tends to be an interest in trying to protect the cloud, right? And that can be SaaS applications that you purchase, that can be private applications that you get private access to either in your own data centers or in IaaS. It could be protecting from the web in general and threats. So what we're seeing really is this need for a component of the platform, the SaaSi platform, that protects more than just what I need today, right? So maybe I do have a project that's associated with URL filtering and threat blocking and things like that would typically fall under something like a secure gateway type component. But I know later I may want to do protection that might fall under a CASB bucket, or later I might want to fall under a DLP type. Maybe I'm in a regulated vertical and I need to look at healthcare and financial services and look at PCI and PHI and whatnot. So if those options don't exist, you're going to start cobbling things together, right? And that's what you don't necessarily want to do. You don't want that gobbledygook of network equipment that people try to put together on their corporate networks. You want this platform that is pervasive, as many people have said, that is global, that is scalable, that's everywhere. And so from a starting perspective, I don't necessarily know that one thing comes up as, hey, I mean, maybe the project is that I need Swig right now or CASB right now or ZTNA right now. But as that transitions, as that grows and that changes, you're going to want something that's extensible. And so I would also think about solutions from a technical perspective that are built in-house as well. There's a lot of OEMing going on and whatnot. So like if someone, for example, needs a powerful DLP engine and you find out that the vendor is providing it through an OEM, that can be a problem. You might have a feature request they can't fulfill because of that. So understanding kind of at a deeper level of how things work and how things are integrated and how you can expand is really key when you're doing one of these evaluations.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in and actually add a piece to that in terms of what to start first. I think if you look at what everybody's been doing the last, say, 9 months now, it feels like forever, but there's been a lot of, and you guys called it out a minute ago, there's been a focus on remote access. And remote access is a common conversation the last few months because, well, VPNs are melting when people start using or consuming either their SaaS edge or their internet services through a VPN. So you see that whole idea of shifting access to applications for private applications is moving. And I think that's also where a lot of the industry has really started to come on fire the last, say, 9 months, is because the need is there. Because, well, hey, the solutions everyone built for roughly most enterprises built VPN for about 30% of their organization at any one time. And then come March, they need to do 100%. They have to rethink this. And we called out before about deploying services for deploying laptops or devices or tablets for people when they need to be working from home. But there was also the need to then scale out infrastructure. And scaling infrastructure, there was a complete shortage of all sorts of physical infrastructure. And as Paul called out earlier, that kind of is also the wrong way of going because you're just multiplying the problem you already have. So that idea of the zero trust platform became into play. And that was the most important thing.
You look at, I also like to think of like, okay, remote access. Is it really remote access or is it future access? I mean, that's just how the people are going to work. It's not about working from home. And I like to, let's just go back and assume everybody's back in the office, which can happen. I mean, that's actually like being around other people is actually a really good thing. So let's say we go back to the office, just take a look at your phone, your laptop. You cannot buy a device with an Ethernet port. Where are you plugging it into? Take a look at where consumer technology has gone. When people talk about, well, you still need a switch and you still need gear in the office today, but in the future, it might be a telco. You buy bandwidth from a telco. It's a Wi-Fi access point that has all the links coming into it, and everybody connects through there because it's untrusted transport. The idea with zero trust is that you can't trust the connection. Now, SaaSi provides the connection and the bridge, the front door of those applications, and relies on zero trust to figure out identity and role so that we can make everything feel like it's on the internet, when in reality, it's only accessible to that user because of who they are. Now, because of single sign-on and the way that identity works is that because they've authenticated to the SaaSi platform, we're also going to use that same identity when they log into when they get authenticated against Zoom or Office 365, they won't get prompted again because it's all single sign-on. So the reality, the way I look at the world is that the perimeter, the network boundaries are completely eroded, and they're eroding. And it's not whether it's going to happen, and it's not about COVID. It's just it was going to go in this direction anyways. I actually would even argue that new homes and things like that, you don't really find them. They're not building them with Ethernet jacks around the house and stuff like that. They know that all of this is wireless. Even down to think of your smart home with Z-Wave. It's the replacement for Bluetooth. I mean, that's all wireless. The future of connectivity, which is the foundation of any sort of cloud strategy that you may have, is in the cloud. Users are going to consume more bandwidth because they have to. It's the only way they can consume the applications. So you need something that can process an infinite amount of bandwidth. That shouldn't be your problem. It should be the service's problem. And of course, 99% of the traffic, according to Google, if you look at the Google Transparency Report, which tracks encrypted traffic by the day, 99% of all traffic is encrypted by browsing time. And if you think about that, how are you checking the bags? You got to decrypt the data. And if you're worried that if you turn on decryption and your gear is going to go to 10% of that is the problem. My view of the world in the future is organizations will not buy firewalls. Those will be gone. I believe that they're going to connect directly through an internet telco, probably through Wi-Fi. If you need a firewall to protect anything, it's probably in Azure and it's probably in AWS, if there's any. And that's probably delivered as a SaaS service. Look at what they're doing in Azure with firewall as a service. You enable the firewall, and that automatically routes, load balances, decrypts, provides the value without the overhead. So you're not even managing any virtual firewall appliance. That all goes away. And that's where I think the future state goes. Is it that it happens in the next 6 months? Like realistically, no, that's not going to happen over 6 months. But we should be planning and looking at what the future looks like in the coming year, 2 years, 3 years, because the thing about technology, you know, people say technology eats the world. It's true. I mean, things change so rapidly. I was actually the other day jumping an Uber, and I realized Uber wasn't even around 4 or 5 years ago. It was purely taxi, but now you can't even imagine a life without it. So that's, you know, I see that a lot differently. And I'll end with, you know, whether it's ZTNA, SWG, CASB, these are all critical components of connectivity and security that have always existed. CASB is another definition for DLP. What does it provide? Data loss, inspection of cloud applications, designed for cloud. So look at these capabilities as an IT administrator, security administrator, you know them well, and just look at and imagine of getting these same capabilities, but through a SaaS service at scale for users wherever they go, without overloading circuits. That makes your life so much easier and so much better.
Yeah, I mean, even prior to this, when COVID hadn't come out, there was a huge push towards Sd-Wan and connectivity. That was a big thing, and that's a piece of the SaaS connection as well. So you're going to want a vendor that can also connect, be it that you have Sd-Wan or just tunnels, IPsec or GRE from the corporate network. But as people move around, you want to be able to protect those connections no matter what, right? And so DLP came up a couple times. I mean, one key thing is that you can create policies that are the same across whatever app someone's connecting to, right? Be it a service or an app. And if you think about VPN and ZTNA as a replacement, a lot of people start thinking, hey, I want to replace my VPN connector, which is now overloaded, right? I think Paul called that out a second ago. What you also want to do, though, is protect it in the same way that you're doing with your SaaS apps. Right. So I want to look at data movement. I want to be able to do DLP and access control and UEBA and things like that all at the same time. So making sure that you can get this consistent security across whatever solution you adopt is really key here, regardless of where you start. Yeah,
and to finally, just to wind that up, I think the key thing here is you think about WAN, which SaaS calls it out. What really it is it's an overlay of everything we're trying to do from a protection and connection point of view on whatever network. It should really not matter, as we initially began the conversation about. It doesn't matter what network it is. It should be a uniform, functional connectivity and securing of that user's traffic. And making sure that like you, as you point out, Mike, regardless of whether in the office or wherever they may be, they get that access. And it's, you know, the SD-WAN topic makes me smile because I know quite a few people who deployed very successful SD-WAN projects in 2019. And where are they now? The things are sitting there gathering dust, unfortunately. And, you know, as phones develop more and more connectivity, you know, my phone's got a 4G, 5G and Wi-Fi connection. It's arguably an SD-WAN box. You know, I can move my laptop to it. I can connect any device to it. So I'm walking around with an SD-WAN box in my hand. So anyone can do that. So I think the idea of the network itself as being the be-all end-all is probably the wrong thing. And to Paul's point a bit earlier, yes, the network is shifting to the cloud, but it's just a matter of now overlaying that path on a kind of you know, say a very simplistic plumbing that gets us to the right place, and that right place would be that secure access service edge to apply the control, and it should be seamless anywhere, anything. And that functionality, whether it be a DLP, whether it be a SSL decryption, whether it be whatever the solution might be required, those controls then get applied appropriately, whether the person's in Sydney, Germany, US, wherever, it doesn't matter. So I think that's the key, is that it's an overlay to everything that we've seen before.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And this brings us to the next question. Paul, let's look at it from the other side, right? We have great products, great SaaS solutions coming in the market, right? The next Dropbox and many other interesting companies. What would be your advice in regards to best practices these companies should follow to make their product SaaS compatible, so it's very easy to plug them into existing SaaS solutions and, you know, make all the preparations that's required for cloud security?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is actually pretty simple. It's called standards. You know, my pet peeve is, and I've been designing protocols, I've done anything from ASICs, FPGA software, you name it, is when organizations or people decide to make their own custom protocols or their own custom whatever, which actually, you know, interestingly enough, that design, the protocol, whatever you design, may be really good, actually maybe exponentially better than what's currently available. The problem is that it's not compatible. You've just created your own language. So I would recommend for any company and any buyer to look at standards for when they buy or integrate anything, including SaaS platforms. And for example, SAML is a standard for identity. So if I'm doing anything with an IDP or identity provider, I want SAML. I might want SCIM so that it can naturally add users to the SaaS platform. So I would look at if it's something with SD-WAN, make sure it supports standard GRE and IPsec tunnels, because that's gonna tunnel to any SaaS provider if you want to have branch offices that connect that way, versus custom handshake, something or other.
What about API, Paul?
100% REST and 100% JSON. If you look at the way I think it's interesting when you look at legacy firewalls, where they talk about app ID, and their app ID notion is, we detect 4,000 applications. Take a look at those applications. AOL Instant Messenger with their custom, that doesn't exist anymore. All of the applications run in your browser. They use REST and JSON as the standard pretty much across the board. And if they don't, they're going to, because all of APIs love that protocol, and they've all standardized around it. And that also allows the SaaS platform to break and inspect and apply standardized inspection patterns and things like that to those APIs. So it allows you to overlay security, malware, DLP very easily, get visibility. But I would stick to API-driven. APIs always REST and JSON, HTTP protocols. I would use SAML, SCIM for your identity provider, and I would use GRE and IPsec for any sort of SD-WAN or any sort of platform. And I think just using those alone would naturally put you in a really nice position for any SaaS edge.
Right. So sticking to the accepted normal and standards, that's the most important thing.
100%. Actually, I tend to think even now, we're integrating with an iBoss. We integrate with so many vendors. Our position is more of an open platform as well. Like, we inspect billions and billions, over 100 billion plus a day of traffic in our cloud service, and we can gather threat intelligence, and we can apply signatures. We distribute them for efficacy. But we do believe that as a SaaS edge, you've got to be able to be compatible with feeds, with malware engines. It's called threat intelligence that threat research labs like FireEye, for example, and others create. And the SaaS edge needs to be able to consume and apply those types of intelligence capabilities to your connections. So I do think that at the end of the day, it comes down to standards and collaboration.
Yeah, I got to add one more piece to that. I also say segmentation and appropriately segmenting out what needs access to what. All too often you see, and I've seen this in my previous life, that a service will be a standard in one communication, then all of a sudden there'll be something else that needs to be done, and they'll build a different way of working, and it won't be segmented out. It'll be in the same front end, just be on a different port, and then ultimately you expose the company. So I really am a big caller. I believe in what Paul just said, and it's absolutely spot on. But also look at segmenting things out. Make sure you're putting the right protections between the different layers. Don't stick everything on one host. If you're going to build out something, make sure you put your database. Don't put it on the internet for everyone to connect to. Put it on a private segment, isolate that, and make sure there's only appropriate communication between the service and the database. Don't expose these things. That's critical to when we're doing this, because we have all these wonderful standards, and it's great to see that guys like iBoss and we at Zscaler do the same thing. We follow those standards, but the challenge is when you deal with a customer or an enterprise that's built an application that is not standard specific, and you can do everything around it, but it breaks other things as well. And I like to always talk about, as I'm Australian, I like to kind of throw this analogy out there. If I give you a hammer and you throw it like a boomerang, you're going to get very different results than if you throw a boomerang. So make sure you use the right tool for the right job, and make sure you're doing the right segmentation, applying the controls, standardizing things in the right places so that they can be interoperable, because otherwise, as you say, it can be absolute murder on everyone trying to get those working.
Yeah, I agree. 100% agree with Nathan. I mean, the reality, and that's what we love about SaaSi, right, is users connect through a SaaSi service, and that SaaSi service plants the data using microsegmentation to the front door of just that application, and basically makes every application appear to be private, even if it's a public application like Office 365, things like tenancy restrictions. But you can do this with SaaSi edges because they lock the front doors. And it's a comply to connect type of policy. So I think that's a really critical thing as well.
Yeah.
Mike, you on mute.
I'd like to add that also you need to be scalable and be able to roll out something that doesn't take you to your knees, right? Like if you think about the comment that was made a minute ago, if you turn on decryption, which is probably 80 to 90% of the traffic today on the networks, the boxes will drop to a tenth of the performance, right? And so going back to the analogy that people use a lot of times, racking and stacking DVD players inside of a place that doesn't turn into Netflix. If you think about Netflix, though, it's not a coincidence that Netflix uses AWS. And if you think about another analogy that I like to talk about, it's almost like if you're starting an airline, what would you do? Would you go build an airport, or would you go buy airplanes? And so analogy-wise there, that is similar to some vendors out there going out and building their own data centers versus using things like the public cloud. Public cloud infrastructure, it has the benefit of things like AWS, Google, Microsoft fighting it out, and the vendors that are using those benefit, just like Netflix does. And so end customers then also benefit from a cost perspective as things go down in price. But while things are scalable and you may have IaaS infrastructure that's using the public cloud, uptime is really critical as well. And you want to be asking that and figuring out that while someone might say, okay, great, we'll give you an SLA and we'll pay you money back if something goes down, what you really have there is an outage, right? Which affects the end users. So it's really critical that you monitor those things, and that people are monitoring them third-party wise, that it's not just coming from word of mouth from someone as well. So interoperability is key, standards are key, and so is scalability and uptime.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add, though, and maybe a little bit differing of opinion, is a SASE edge requires tight control of the data path, not just for security, but latency and performance. And I think that there's raw ingredients there that is not a general use case. For example, the connectivity is key. If you look at the tier 1 telcos, whether you're talking about the CenturyLinks, or you might be talking about Telia and others, there's raw ingredients that you need to make a SASE edge work, but also users are just everywhere. They're not just, SASE edge is not like a web application that users access and grab some data from. They're connecting through the service. So that SASE edge has to be all over the world, many times over where the more concentrated regions that you might find in a public cloud. So I do take a little bit of a different opinion in that I'm all about the use case. And for me, the tight control of connectivity, the ability to buy and route your traffic through telcos directly, which connect directly to AWS and the front door of Azure through peering. You go to peering DB and other places where you're directly peered. I think just not only provides the security, but it also gives you tight control over latency and speed, which at the end of the day is productivity, end user experience, and all of those kind of things. However, I do agree with the point that if you're trying to do this with DVD players, it's just not going to work. You're not going to build a data center. You're likely going to be inside of, the Equinixes and, these large data center providers that have already built them, SOC 2 compliant data centers. But you're going to have your infrastructure if you're going to go down this route. But you also need the software, which is by far the most important, because this is not an infrastructure discussion. Or even if we're talking about cloud, this is a software discussion. The reason Netflix works is not necessarily because of, let's say, AWS or whether they run in their own business. It's because they have the software that has automated the delivery of movies in under 30 seconds to any user anywhere in the world. It's the software that does that.
I was always thinking it's the chaos monkey. This is the only reason why is it working, no?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I do think that the software is what makes this possible, like the SaaSification of the technology to deliver it instantly in seconds to users anywhere they say.
And that's key to the SASE model, is about making sure the users don't have a clue it's there, right? It just should be as quick and easy as possible for them. And whether that be deployment, and that's why I think it could be a bit of both, a bit of your own. It really depends on how close you can get that edge down to the customer, the end user consuming that service, so they don't know that it actually exists. It becomes transparent to them. And that's critical to ensuring that it's consumed properly without someone trying to turn off the client or use a different service.
That's one of the things, and that's a good point, Nathan, because one of the things I like, so one of the, I'm finding with firewall as a service, for example, for Azure, virtual WAN, the ability for the SASE service to stretch into Azure, not connect your infrastructure to a SASE provider's data centers, but instead have the SASE platform automatically create the gateways and the connectivity capacity in Azure to scrub data in Azure for that use case. But yet when a user is traveling, that may be going through a completely different path. It's not Azure at all, or AWS. It's maybe through the SASE provider's data centers. But it's an intelligent fabric that stretches into public and public clouds, cloud service providers, infrastructure and software.
Yeah, so all good points, and it's actually makes sense that security has to be transparent for users. It brings us to our kickoff episode of the second season, where Dr. Chase Cunningham said users that are not security people should not have to be security people to do their job.
Yeah. We are doing our best to avoid what happened last week with the supply chain attack, but I think it's quite still important, and people are asking also on the questions, how would SaaS platform may protect from such attack on the supply chain, or maybe what you can see in the future?
So I'm happy to jump in on that one. I think the important thing is, I mentioned a bit earlier, was visibility. If you do have traffic, and we've actually, all three of us have been talking very heavily about users, which is a big key component of this, but one of the things about this recent incident is very much about the servers or the applications talking out as well. And I think that visibility is key. No doubt that, as Paul points out, having an incredible set of threat feeds, allowing you to do that kind of cloud security push and actually see something and then push out protection across the cloud is very helpful. But that visibility needs to come first. And so you need to have the traffic going through the visibility points. So one of the biggest things about these sort of supply chain attacks that we will see moving forward is trying to get visibility at that layer to be able to see the communication. Now, it may not be like this is the case with where we've seen with the recent one, is that we only found out about it recently, but when we track back against logs, we were able to see the visibility to earlier this year. But that was not seen as an IOC at the time. So now, once we have that hindsight, we can have that information. We had the visibility because we had the eyes on the path in some locations. Other locations, we didn't have eyes on that path. So I think the important thing about really anything is visibility. Now, SaaSi in its model is to talk about connectivity and security in path, right? So we need to have connectivity from the user or the service going through that control engine so we can have that visibility. Without that visibility, we really can't have any chance to do anything. So I think that's the key point, is to ensure that you do have that traffic passing through that edge, whatever it might be, ensuring that you actually get the visibility of that flow, and then have the ability to go back and historically, should you need to, looking to see maybe there was an IOC earlier on, maybe there wasn't, but you have the ability to go back and get visibility. Again, visibility gives you the ability to make a decision and actually act. If you don't have that, you're kind of spinning in the wind. So I think the key thing here is SaaSi provides that uniform way of logging, viewing, inspecting, understanding. And so if you have everything going through those SaaSi gateways, those SaaSi edges, then you have a unified way of collecting information and being able to make an appropriate decision without kind of, as I said, spitting in the wind.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I mentioned some of this stuff earlier as well. Visibility is key, and then figuring out what you're going to do after that is, I think, the next step, which Nathan was pointing out there as well. Some of the simple examples of looking at the traffic now you understand to be related to command and control or related to download and expansion on the network and lateral movement and things like that are critical. Detecting and seeing what's going on the end device to figure out that this device, in fact, is compromised is key there as well. And doing that as close as possible. When we're talking about the edge here and how you get that connectivity and debating back and forth between public cloud versus not, something that it can also be done is to actually do the things on the endpoint themselves, right? To do inspection down on the actual endpoint to see what's going on. And instead of a tunnel, for example, cutting off access to that device in particular that's been exfiltrated data and starting to be a problem in your networks. So identifying, getting that visibility, reporting upon it, taking control, and then integrations with other things is really key too, right? It's not just that one solution is going to provide that. You need integrations with SIMs and backend log things where you can connect things that are happening on the network with things that are happening on the device, marrying them together, and potentially even making an automation with a playbook inside of a SOAR vendor or another way of remediating an attack. But looking at things and then saying, 1 + 1 + 1 here, which would have been not as more benign and not as severe, now add up to something that's really critical, right? So I need to take a look at this immediately, and being able to do that with the retention of those logs over time is really critical, regardless of if you go in and hire someone to help you do this or you start trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I agree, and I think just to reinforce on that point, and you mentioned it earlier as well, is most of the traffic is encrypted. So there's this component of, if you're going to get out of the organization, whether it's a device or a user or anything else, or you're going to come into the organization, more than likely it's going to come through a connection. I mean, I don't think it's coming through the ceiling, the ceiling tiles with a USB drive to steal the trade secrets. I think, when you look at the hacks and you look at the attacks, they're coming through connections. That's why SASE is such a critical component. It's also why decryption is also very critical as well. I like all techniques that you can possibly use to, prevent data loss, exfiltration, breaches, and things like that. For example, looking at certificate exchanges, SNI, looking at patterns, anomalies in the data, volumetric, and things like that. But I've also seen kind of extreme claims or use cases of that. For example, I don't really need to decrypt because with my ML models, I can pretty much tell you what's going on inside those packets and whether it's malicious or not. And I think that it's not to say that we shouldn't use ML models and we shouldn't look at the packets. We do. And I think that that's important in terms of understanding when there's a connection. If you're able to pull the destination IPs, the SNI, the certs, the patterns, do that for sure. But there's no way that with certainty you're going to be able to say that you can tell what's in those packets, because realistically, the destination of that traffic is a content delivery network. It's probably Cloudflare, could be Akamai. The destination IP is probably a CDN as well, content delivery network. TLS 1.3 is right around the corner. It's going to encrypt point to point from the beginning to the end, all of the connections. So it's making it harder and harder to find. And if I could actually tell you what's inside of every luggage that's going through the TSA checkpoint without opening those bags, then why are we wasting our time at the airports? You need to check the baggage. And I think that a SASE platform intelligently leverages cases like, for example, if we know that a piece of luggage looks 3 times the size that it normally should, that's definitely something that you want to look at. And that's probably something that you want to prevent. But at the same time, things that don't look abnormal from the outside, you're going to break and inspect, and you're going to actually scrub the files, the content, the communications, the URLs, the payloads, in order to determine whether it is malicious or not by actually looking at the content. So I do think that that decryption becomes really key. I mean, actually using all techniques, those that are used without decryption and those that are used with decryption, and then going back to the SIMs. And visibility is once you decrypt and once you get in that content, you can see as much as you need to see. If you want to store the file, if that's as far as you want to go, you can do that. If you want to grab the URLs, the links, the botnet callbacks, you can do that as well. But also add that you can have the best insurance policy in the world, the seatbelts, the airbags, the anti-lock brakes, the self-driving car. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get in an accident or that it can't happen. But I can tell you that with certainty that if you drive without seatbelts and without brakes and airbags, your risk is extremely high. It's the equivalent of users that today are working remotely and you decide that you're going to do a split tunnel VPN to offload the traffic because it's overloading your network. So the best thing you can do is just allow them to just go straight out. That's the worst case scenario, because at that point it's the Wild West. And if I'm a hacker or a threat actor, I'm going to be targeting that because it's a free for all. And so just move away from a castle and moat mentality where I have my castle and my fortress to a mentality that, look, the users are going to connect to things, but I'm going to ensure I own those connections, whether it's coming through my network or not. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to look in the bags and I'm going to get the visibility regardless of where the user sets.
Yeah, and to add a piece, I think you've nailed the inspection piece adds the visibility clearly because you have the ability to make those decisions. But I think the other thing also is that once you are able to look at perhaps the internal stuff, so not so much the SASE edge, but also maybe the internal, the zero trust modeling, is figure out what are the applications actually meant to be talking to. And if you can take those, for example, you can take a signature and understand that this application is meant to be this size, talk to this application, which is this size, and start doing those sort of segmentations on the lower line inside that application space, then it could be very beneficial as well. But it's, again, you can't do that until you actually have that visibility. And I love the analogy of looking at a bag that should be 3 sizes. If it's 3 sizes too big, clearly that's a problem. You should be able to look at those and understand them pretty simply. And that's critical. Visibility allows you to make those decisions.
Guys, thank you very much. We're going to move to questions. We have several questions on the line here. I'll start with the first one. So what kind of business may benefit from SASE? Small, medium, enterprise? And what kind of skills that people in such business need to have to actually manage such solution?
Like I can start that one. I think I talk to Dave DeWalt all the time. Former CEO of FireEye, McAfee, and one of the things we love about SASE is it applies to any size organization. Obviously, it benefits the large to ultra large because it simplifies those the security. It makes them more agile, more cost efficient. But if you can deliver capabilities instantly through the cloud and as SaaS, that makes it so that even the smaller organizations can acquire it without all of the spend complexity and everything else that goes with it. So, traditional models, if you wanted to do decryption and you want to do inspection, just to get the gear to do that, to spec it out, purchase it, have the skill set, it would be astronomical. The costs are just through the roof. But SaaS simplifies all of that and can deliver that capability to the smallest organizations with the same level of efficacy that the 100,000 device network is using as well. So I love SaaS because it just makes technology and security more accessible to virtually every vertical and every size organization. Now,
Fully agree.
One thing I would finally add to that is look, if you're smaller, maybe you do need that. You're going to need the MSP or someone to really understand the alerts and things like that and to help. But from
how many people now do I have to hire to roll out this SASE solution? I'm not a 100,000 person organization. Even 10,000 can be big as well. But the point being is that you want someone that can help you. You want to be able to do it yourself if you can. And some of the things that we're seeing from that rat's nest and kind of combination of a bunch of security tech that people run into is that you might have one person that's an expert at the FireEye, and another person that's a Palo Alto expert, another person that knows about secure gateway and web filtering and knows about semantic and things like that. But what's going on with the SASE is that everything's being combined. So what you're really looking for is an ability to see everything in one place. Maybe a bad analogy, but the single pane of glass that everyone used to talk about 5 years ago, right? As a place where you go looking to get visibility. But the key thing there really I'm trying to hit upon is more of the policies. So that when you describe the policies, you can do something that we were talking about earlier. You describe and say, I don't care that this is a SaaS app and this other app over here is a ZTNA app. I need the same type of protection policy with respect to threats and with respect to data exfiltration and admission control and access control and data inspection just across the board. And so regardless of what that is, you want something that is not a hodgepodge of different things stuck together, which can sometimes happen from companies that do a lot of acquisitions and that pair things together. You want this kind of combined platform so that regardless of where you start, be it something we mentioned before, Sd-Wan or VPN or ZTNA or CASB or SWG, it results in something that can be extensible and provide a security posture that's more homogeneous security-wise.
Interesting question about storage and cloud. We have more and more traffic going toward the cloud and need to stay there. And maybe we potentially need to have a different standards for encryption. What do you guys think about it?
Encryption-wise, I think that depends on what you're talking about. It was kind of vague with respect to what the data storage mechanism can be. There's a lot of different types. It can be personal storage. It can be an application that you roll out with respect to S3 and AWS and blobs in Azure and all kinds of things like that you may own yourself. This could also be a question about security with respect to a vendor that you may purchase from a SaaS perspective, where you're going to go and maybe you have that as well. From a custom application development perspective, and you need to protect it. But then you also have a SaaS app like Box that you're going to adopt. So, going back to Paul's answer earlier, I think standards are key there, and people inventing things that are not vetted, it would be something that I would avoid there. Things like AES-256 and whatnot that have been used for many years are key. But doing some of that inspection, let's say it's an application you're thinking of adopting and you're not quite sure yet. That's where some of that discovery stuff comes in with respect to what Nathan was talking about. Identifying with respect to this app that they do support AES-256, but then you find out that it's not enabled by default, or you have to pay an extra fee for it, or whatnot is key there. So I think really drilling down into the details is key there. If it's a SaaS app, discovery can help. If it's your own personal apps, then sometimes a SASE vendor can help too to do this encryption for you with data, but there comes the trade-off there. If you're bringing your own keys and you're not using the native key stores in Microsoft or in AWS, then now all of a sudden I've encrypted this thing and my application cannot decrypt the data any longer because they don't have the key, right? So there's a trade-off there. So be careful with encryption. A lot of times we hear when we do structured data encryption for SaaS apps like Salesforce and other things like that, and some people will come to you and say, I want to encrypt everything. I want to be protected as best as I possibly can. And that is not the right direction to go. That causes a bunch of problems. So what you really want to do is kind of understand the issue and the trade-offs there while you're protecting your data so that it's protected not only in the apps that store the data, but when you pull the data down to the device, maybe you want to encrypt it that way too. So I guess it depends is the answer there.
We're running a bit out of time, so I'm going to have time for the last question. And later on, everybody that's listening to us, feel free to email us and we will forward the questions to the participant and we'll answer in a different way, or maybe on LinkedIn. And the question I want to ask is about potentially a person that's working in multiple places. Maybe he's a hire contractor or a doctor, and he need to work with multiple people or multiple vendors, and maybe they have different SaaS solutions. How would you do? Can you deploy maybe multiple clients?
That's one of the great things with SaaSi, cloud solutions is they're multi-tenant, and multi-tenancy is an aspect that I think is really important to have within the SaaSi platform at its core. And so the idea, and we do this at iBoss with lots of large organizations, MSPs, and others that service multiple customers, or an organization that's a conglomerate and has lots of different franchises, and each franchisee has, let's say, groups of stores or groups of employees. The nice thing about the multi-tenancy aspect is you can manage, not only can you manage it all centrally through and instantly through like a SaaS and a cloud admin console, but you can actually also flip between the organizations and the different policy sets very easily in order to apply different rule sets and different capabilities to the different organizations, employees, contractors. So it's a global edge that exists everywhere. It's a multi-tenant SaaS service that allows you to segment accounts and apply policies to different accounts and flip between them very easily.
And I think the only thing to add to that is depends on what the application is that you're trying to consume, and how that so-called contractor and the companies they're servicing are providing these applications. So if you can leverage the sort of browser access-based solutions as much as you can, therefore simplifying it for access, you don't need to worry about installing multiple clients. You just hit the browser edge on the edge of the cloud, on the edge of the SaaSi edge, rather than having to worry about installing multiple clients. That will benefit it. But of course, if there's a need for fat clients on devices, then that's a different conversation. But yeah, I think it's that balance of what Paul said and understanding the application flow for what that application really is.
Yeah, I mean, we to add a little of that as well, we've seen lots of use cases that happen with, I think doctors was an example that you gave there, but contractors is also one too, where, you're accessing something and it may be on a machine that the IT department for the organization that's working with this contractor, maybe it's a partner, doesn't have control over, right? And so going through that approach where you're going to try to install something on that machine, maybe just be a non-starter to start with. So there you might need a different aspect where you can do things like CASB-based API scanning in the backend to see if something's threat, the reverse proxy type solution where you don't install anything on the actual endpoint itself. But I think the key thing here is to get back to the use case you're trying to solve. Think about what that might be. Make sure you do your research, and again, don't just stick to looking at the dots and picking something. Make sure that you analyze it and you really do the testing to make sure it solves the problem you're looking to solve.
Great, thank you, everyone. We don't have time to more questions, but as I said before, feel free to message me, Dimitri, and we'll get back with answers. Mike, before we finish, can you please tell us a bit more how people can find more information about BitGlass?
Sure. Yeah, just come to the BitGlass website and contact us. We get back to you very quickly, and we can talk through whatever that starting point may be.
And of course, watch the episodes for season 1 and season 2. Mm-hmm. Nathan?
Yeah, very similar to Mike. Visit zscaler.com and place a question there, and we'll be able to get back to you very quickly with any questions you might have. And again, I'll be getting to the point here and watch the episodes from season 1 and season 2 as well.
Paul?
Same thing, iboss.com, and there's lots of information on there as well. So lots of different use cases and things like that. But just iboss.com, and we can get back to you pretty quickly.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good holidays. Stay safe over there, and we'll see you in the future episodes. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.